Joining us now is Zach Schultz, senior political reporter for PBS Wisconsin. Tim Miller is former communications director for Jeb Bush's 26th campaign, host of the Bulwark podcast, and an MSNBC political analyst. Barbara McQuaid is a former U.S. attorney in Michigan, law professor at the University of Michigan Law School, and an MSNBC legal analyst. Okay, Zach, as you talk with voters, I wonder what they're telling you is driving them to the polls. How much of what they're saying is about local issues? How much of it is anger or excitement about this bigger picture of what's happening in the country?
Well, early on in this cycle, like a month or two ago, a lot of the people being driven to being aware of this race were the typical categories of it's a Wisconsin election, so of course it's going to be significant, of course it's going to be important. As things progressed and we saw more national influence, Bernie Sanders rallying in Wisconsin, Elon Musk coming in, and the amount of outside dollars really ramping up, it became more partisan. It became following along the lines of last November, where it was R versus D. This is a nonpartisan race in the spring in Wisconsin, but we've shed that label a long time ago for Supreme Court elections because they are so consequential. And Wisconsin voters understand the stakes. But there are a lot of Wisconsin-based issues about our state laws that people care about. I'm not actually hearing as much from Wisconsin voters about some of these national implications or tying it to Trump. That's the effort of the campaigns to get those who aren't as invested in the race to come in at the last minute.
So, Tim, we have seen Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, Elon Musk suggest officials defy court orders. They say government attorneys have tried to remove judges from cases, and Trump has called for impeaching judges. Now, just last hour, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt was asked about an immigration case.
So are you saying that it is okay to ignore a judge's ruling if you don't like it?
Who does that judge work for?
He's an immigration
It was
judge.
an immigration judge who works for the Department of Justice at the direction of the Attorney General of the United States, whose name is Pam Bondi, who has committed to eradicating MS-13 from our nation's interior.
So, Tim, for Trump and his supporters who see judges as a threat to what they want to do, what will tonight's decision tell us and them?
Well, I'm not sure the tonight's decision is going to tell us a whole lot about this fight against the judiciary that this administration is undertaking, because that is going to be an ongoing fight, and this is just one battle in it. That in general, incumbent presidents struggle in early, special elections and midterms because the opposition is more motivated. That's been especially true of Trump. It was true the first time. So, I think that it's possible the Democrats could win tonight, and that would just be one step in this ongoing battle. You heard Elon Musk in that quote saying, complaining about judges being political or politicizing the judiciary. And here he is spending $20 million to inject politics as much as possible into a judicial race. And so, look, these guys see this as a political game, and that's how they're going to play it. And they're not afraid. This goes all the way back to Trump attacking, judges back in his 2016 campaign. He had Judge Curiel he attacked for being from Mexico. So that's what these guys are going to do. One side note, just I think bears mentioning on what Caroline Leavitt said there. She said that Pam Bondi overruled this immigration judge to deport the person that was here illegally to El Salvador. That story from last night. That Pam Bondi hasn't actually even said anything about that. So that's the other thing that these people do, is that in court they speak a different tone than they speak in their political language. In their political language, they're attacking this judge when the Department of Justice, in a legal filing last night, admitted they made a mistake in deporting this person, but the press secretary and Pam Bondi aren't reflecting what the actual lawyers that work for the government are saying.
Yeah, I want to go back to Caroline Leavitt, if I can, Barbara. Asked, is it okay to ignore a ruling? And she said, who does the judge work for? And she says, at the direction of the Attorney General of the U.S., whose name is Pam Bondi. What does the Constitution and what does U.S. law tell us about how this system works?
Yeah, I think one of the things that Caroline Leavitt is suggesting there is that because immigration judges are part of the Department of Justice, they need to rule in favor of the government in every case. And of course, that is not how it works. They are there to administer the law. They do work for the Department of Justice, but that does not mean that they are allowed to play favorites. One of the things that statement by Caroline Leavitt reveals is a technique we've seen her use, Donald Trump use, Pam Bondi use, and that is to focus on substance over process. it may very well be the case that there are many people in this country who want to see undocumented immigrants removed from this country. That is the substantive issue. But the process is just as important. We have to follow the law. So, for example, when we heard Pam Bondi say, attack Judge Boasberg and saying that he had sided with terrorists when he entered a temporary restraining order in the case involving the Tren de Aragua men who were deported to El Salvador. He didn't side with the terrorists. He wasn't supporting terrorists. He was supporting the law. And that includes due process and the application of the law. And due process is necessary to make sure that it's the right people who are being deported. And now we find this information that a mistake was made. Well, that's what happens when people don't get a hearing to determine whether they really are eligible to be deported under this order.
Let me go to an even bigger picture than that, Barbara, which is, to be specific, this election is going to decide a balance on a court. And this is a court that is expected to hear cases about abortion, about union rights, about congressional maps, right? Trump's brand is to indeed fight longstanding legal norms, to fight precedent. So what are the real stakes here as you see them if there is a message to be sent by voters about this?
Yeah, I think most importantly, it is that state Supreme Courts, including Wisconsin, decide disputes over congressional district lines. There are some seats that are under review. And so if this court becomes simply the puppet of the Trump administration and moves those district lines, it could result in different seats being held in Congress. And with a slim 4-member majority by the Republican Party right now, that kind of redistricting could cause a swing in the party in control. It's one of the things Elon Musk has focused on, saying that this is the biggest election in the history of civilization because it could potentially determine who controls the House, and that is whether there would be anybody in place to serve as a check against Donald Trump's overreach in legal cases.
Tim, you heard Elon Musk say judges are activists, but as the judiciary emerges as the primary check on Trump's power, I don't think there's been any doubt about what we've seen. We mentioned those statistics. What's the reality? Is this indeed Trump versus the Constitution, and whether or not the Constitution holds?
Look, a lot of the reason why this is happening is because the Trump administration has acted lawlessly, or, at times they've acted in ways that are just opposite of the plain text of the Constitution. Think of the birthright citizenship case, for example. In other ways, that they're testing the bounds of the law, the coloring outside the lines, if you will. And they're doing this over and over again, and they're doing it via executive fiat, executive order, rather than doing it through Congress. So when the executive branch is acting lawlessly, then they are going to come into conflict with the courts, and that's going to be a continued conflict. One thing I thought is an interesting fact, just to kind of put this in context, in the first Trump administration, the Supreme Court, which was pretty friendly to Trump and was at that point a 5-4 majority among conservative justices, they went against the administration more times than in any presidency since FDR. So you couldn't say that the 5-4 Supreme Court is like biased or liberal or politicized or whatever. At that point, it was pretty Trump friendly, and even they opposed Trump a lot of times. Why? Because Trump tried to break the law a lot of times. And I think that is the reality, and they're trying to, fudge that politically speaking and try to make it into a political fight rather than a fight about the law, because I think they think they're on stronger ground there.
Zach, for a very long time, let's just say that state Supreme Court races were not exactly fire. And you write about the fact that they were sleepy affairs in Wisconsin, as they were in many places, until 2023. Once again, the balance of power on the court was at stake. And turnout, I think you wrote, was nearly double what it had been seen in previous decades. What do we know about turnout today, turnout in this case, and what are you watching for as the night unfolds?
Yeah, to take us back to 2023, that was the first time that there was a chance to flip the court from conservative to liberal. Turnout was at 41%, which was double what we'd seen over the last decade. This time around, what the conservative in this case, Brad Schimmel, is projecting is 2 million voters, which would be 43%. That would be a new record for turnout in Wisconsin. Last fall, we saw 73% for the presidential election. A typical gubernatorial election in Wisconsin is somewhere in the mid-50s. So that would still be a drop off from those high water marks, but that would be 2 million voters. We've already seen 600,000 vote absentee ahead of the day. So the question is, how many of those people were voters that would not have otherwise voted? And how many of those were just voters that would have voted on election day but voted early instead? Also, in northern Wisconsin, we did have some severe storms over the last weekend. Hours out, there were some polling locations that were moved. That is in very conservative Republican territory. They've got the new places up. There's only 6 that were actually moved, but there are questions about whether people will be able to get out and vote as they normally would. So that's another thing we're going to take a look at.